Welcome back to this week's OIS podcast. Today, our host, Dr. Ehsan Sadri, chats with industry leader Ramin Valian of Allergan. Ramin gives us the inside scoop on the AbbVie Allergan merger, their ongoing commitment to eye care innovation, and the mentors that transformed his career. Take it away, Ehsan.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ehsan Sadri. I am fortunate to have my friend Ramin Valian, who is a good friend of mine for many years now, here local in Allergan. And, it's exciting to have him join us today. And for those of you who don't know, Ramin has a really interesting background. I'm not going to steal his thunder. He's going to go through it. But he's really most recently spearheading all the glaucoma and all the other eye care stuff that are exciting coming with AbbVie and legacy Allergan products. So without further ado, Ramin, welcome to OIS Podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you, Ehsan. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure having you. So, most of the KOLs know you obviously on a personal basis. They're probably texting you all the time. But for the folks that are listening in on this podcast that may not know Ramin, tell us a little about your background. Where'd you grow up?
Sure. And actually, before you even start there, I was reminiscing about the first time I met you, Ehsan. And you were my very first ophthalmologist I met when I joined Allergan 16 years ago next week. So
Wow.
It's such a great pleasure to be able to connect with you because I really remember meeting you my very first time in California, meeting a glaucoma specialist. And you were the glaucoma specialist I met very, very first time. It was a pleasure connecting with you 16 years later now.
Amazing how time goes. I remember your daughters were little.
Yeah, started college now.
Amazing. That's why we're still working, right?
Yeah, exactly right. Gotta be intuition.
For now, at least.
Exactly, for now. Yeah, just give you a background. You and I have very similar backgrounds. I actually grew up in Iran. I moved to the United States when I was 12 years old. So right, literally after the Iranian Revolution. And contrary to most people's beliefs, I actually moved to Washington, D.C., not to Los Angeles. And that's where I really grew up in Washington, D.C. area. I grew up in the D.C. area, went to school in Virginia. And really, when I think back on my career and my journey, it's been a very interesting journey coming to the country as a first immigrant, right? And when I think about my children as being like first generation, it's really that really good story of an immigrant coming to the United States and really starting from really zero and building a foundation here. So that's my story. And, when I grew up in Washington, D.C., when I look back at that many different experiences, the last thing I ever thought that I would be getting into is getting into the pharma industry. That back then my ambitions were quite different in D.C. being close to the center of power, which is the Washington, D.C. government and just agencies and State Department and so forth. So when I went to university, actually my studies were very different. I actually studied Middle Eastern studies with a minor in Russian because I had all these aspirations to go into the State Department and join the Foreign Service, just like my father had done when he was an Iranian diplomat. And behold, I got my introduction through the pharmaceutical industry with my sister, who actually started as a representative in Roche laboratories. And I followed my sister's trajectory. Every move she made, I followed her in that same role. So we ended up actually working together. And sure enough, I ended up working in the pharmaceutical industry at Roche in Nutley, New Jersey.
So it's interesting because I remember I miss your dad, by the way. For those of you who know, Ramin's dad was a sweet, kind, very smart and funny person, and I really, really miss him. Every time you and I get together, we talk about him and how all the influences our parents had.
Yeah,
and it's interesting because your sister had a huge influence. Your school, did you study business? What was the initial career?
No, my initial study was anything farther than business. It was really Russian.
Wow.
And it's when I tell people the story of my education, it was really people are shocked because obviously I'm in the business environment. I look at financial numbers, I run big businesses, but my training was very elementary. In fact, like when I left my school, my college, I went to College of William Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. And my first job was actually in the financial industry. And that's really because I needed to learn how to be in a business and how to read financial. I was a financial analyst for maybe 12 to 18 months before I joined Roche as a sales representative in the Washington, D.C. area. And like most people in this industry, your track record starts in the field in sales, right? That's where you get your chops. That's where you get your understanding of customers, your intimacy. And that's where I started in the industry as a rep, but really I started my journey in a totally different vantage point, looking farther out, going into something very different, like in the State Department. And sure enough, I did go international, but Roche Laboratories, which was Swiss-based.
So you were at Roche, and then so obviously there's tremendous amount of experiences there. Let's unpack that a little bit. What led you from that to eye care?
So what happened within that, Roche actually had a really good program for young entrepreneurial successful representatives. So when I was at Roche, you were given a pathway. So you could go into sales management, or you can come into internal product management. And I was selected to come into product management. So what that meant is I spent 2 years in Nutley, New Jersey, going through different various functions like analytics, forecasting, fundamental skills that you need to be a successful business manager. And I did that in a variety of categories, being in obesity, in anti-infectives, in HIV. So when I look at my background, I had very good experiences in the big buckets of business, just not marketing, analytics, sales, training, forecasting, payer, and so forth, in different therapeutic categories. And then eventually, the person I worked for at Roche ended up going to Johnson & Johnson as head of worldwide pharma. And this goes back to how you kind of get your start in different organizations, just like you. This gentleman, Bob Savage, was an early mentor of mine. And when he went to Johnson & Johnson, he called me to leave Roche to join Johnson & Johnson. And imagine this guy's the worldwide president of pharmaceuticals. And, he had a vested interest in my career. So I went to Johnson & Johnson, and I spent about 10 years there on the pain therapeutics business. And as I worked at Johnson & Johnson, I happened to work for a gentleman named Joe Schultz, who you know well. Joe worked at Ortho McNeil, then Ortho Biotech as the president of Ortho Biotech. And many years back, he was recruited to come to Allergan to run the Allergan eye care business. And so he came out to California, and he called me and another individual and asked us to really take the offer to come to California to do something different. And frankly, when I got the call from Joe, I had no idea who Allergan was. I had no idea about eye care. I didn't even know what Botox was, right? So I thought, well, it's interesting. California from East Coast, maybe I'll come to this for a couple of years, learn something. And so I took the shot because I knew Joe, who was a good mentor. And I came to California following Joe Schultz. And that's where my eye care journey began. And, my journey began in the glaucoma space. I think one of my good accomplishments in this organization is I've launched every single glaucoma product in this company. So I have 7 launches, and everything that we market, with the exception of Restasis, I've had a hand in launching it. So that's been a really good experience for me. But that's where my experience in eye care came. It was really through Joe bringing me to California, to Allergan, and putting me in charge of this business, the glaucoma business.
Yeah, and I remember Joe very vividly. Joe just, he was one of those sharp, really no nonsense guys. And I think he left not shortly after you came, right? He wasn't here that much longer.
He was. I mean, we could all be so lucky. I think Joe retired at 47. I moved to Florida. So yeah, he came with a goal, and he reached his goal. And certainly you and I are still here in the game, so we haven't met our goal yet.
Yeah, maybe the goal is the journey. I don't know, but I remember
our journey is still long. Yeah.
I remember I was very jealous though. I remember he took me to Bistango. I was like, "What? What are you retiring?" He's like, "Yep, I'm going to Naples. I'll see ya." Bye. Incredible. So okay, so you come here. Obviously, you've done terrific at Allergan and just built a great brand for yourself, but also through all the ups and downs of AbbVie and then all the MMX activity prior to that. Let's dive into that a little bit, because you join Allergan. It's a obviously pharma heavy eye care, and that now into Botox and all that. But how do you stay there so long? Were you anticipating that? And then more importantly, with all the ups and downs, with all the, all the Ackerman, fiasco stuff that went on and all that stuff, and to here to almost 2022, tell us how'd you navigate through all those crazy, tumultuous times?
Well, that's a really good question. I think one of the things I've been really fortunate in my career in Allergan is it's a great company, right? So if you have they put a stake in you, and they really give you different experiences. So just because, for example, I came in, and I say this to the AbbVie team quite a bit, just because it says eye doesn't mean eye is one thing, right? There's front of eye, there's back of eye, there's different facets in eye care, right? And I think within this business, I've been afforded really good opportunities to learn and do different things. So for example, when I was able to get that launch experience, then I was able to pivot to a global strategic role, right? Then work with R&D and business development, looking at the worldwide business for eye care, for example, right? When I left that, I was able to come back and run the US sales and marketing for a retina team, right? So I was afforded a lot of different opportunities. And I think the thing about Allergan is, and I think people have to always realize, this commitment, this is a company that was founded in eye care, 70 years plus in eye care, right? And it still continues to be a player in this space. And even with AbbVie's recognized the importance of this business to the overall AbbVie business as well. So we continue to invest in this business, right? So going back to your question about change, I think a couple of things. One is, I certainly think it helped coming to this country as an immigrant. That sort of adapts you to change. You have to change, right? You have to learn different language. You have to learn different culture. You have to learn when you see people in the street not to kiss them on the right and the left hand side, or not public in general. Right? Social things you have to be focused on, right? As you know, right? Being, finding your background, it's a little bit complicated, right? So that forces you to have change, right? And I think that really helped me navigate through the change. And I think the thing that most people miss, change creates opportunity. So every time there's been a change, been opportunities for me to step into those changes, right? And I think I've been very focused on, frankly, sometimes keeping your head down and focused on the objective and not getting caught up in a lot of the dynamics that goes around the change, right? And focusing on that's been very helpful. And I tell you, as you brought up like Ackerman or Valiant or AbbVie, and activists, right? Force activists, Prince Saunders and that team as well. So I've gone through constant change for the past, 5 years or so, 5 years or plus, right? But the opportunities haven't changed. My focus hasn't changed. And frankly, the organization has been very good in keeping opportunities open to navigate the change, as long as you're open to looking at things differently, or perhaps a different lens, or approaching problems maybe in a different fashion you've done in the other company, because cultures do change.
They're great points. I mean, we could spend so much time going over how to do that. But your point about change and I remember reading a quote by Einstein. It said, "The only constant in our lives is the acceleration of change."
Yeah.
It's so profound, right? And it's funny because you touched on it as an immigrant kid. You don't really realize you're doing it, but you're just kind of subconsciously got to change. And otherwise you'll just kind of, you just come in and not know, what to expect. And if you don't evolve, you're just kind of not do well. That's fascinating. And also just kind of navigating, also for those people listening, it's not easy navigating a long career with all the external pressures, right? So I mean, Ramin makes it sound easy, but there's all sorts of layoffs and sort of fiscal downturns, upturns, and like one quarter is great, then there's like pressure, and you get bought out, and all those things. I would love to talk to you again, maybe in the future, about that, because it's fascinating. Because when you have a merger, the mother company sometimes is aligned, which just sounds like AbbVie is, and everyone recognizes that. And sometimes we've seen in other, sort of ophthalmic medical device, they're not aligned. And you see the, subsequent spinoff later on, probably a few years later. of the eye units, and we've all seen that. And it's just interesting how one works and one doesn't, and what the team does to make it work. I always just find that to be fascinating. So,
well, and I think to add to that, I think the one thing that's kind of kept us, where we are is, I think the passion of the people in this business is contagious, right? So I think when you have the changes you just talked about being like, Force or Activist or AbbVie, I think people realize there's passion in the business, not only from the employees, but also from the customers, right? And that gets people excited about why they want to invest. People see the future, but I think people have to see the passion, right? And there's passion in this business. That's why I think for all of us, you included, we've had our foot in this business forever, right? And that's why when you look at other legends in the field like David Pyatt or Jim Mazo and others, they never seem to leave this field of ophthalmology because there's an incredible amount of passion behind this field.
Yeah, agreed. The customer really becomes your partner, really, in the product portfolio evolution. It's pretty fascinating. So obviously more to come there. But so let us pivot, because I want to really dive into now what's happening now.
Sure.
Because you've got Durista, and you and I have talked about that, and then what's going on with the product portfolio technologies and all of AbbVie, Allergan. Tell us what's exciting you.
Well, a couple of things. I mean, maybe you have seen this or have not, but as recently Allergan, we just announced a collaboration with Regenxbio for a one-time only gene therapy in the retina space for wet AMD, diabetic retinopathy, and retinal conditions. Now, obviously, that's subject to regulatory approval, but that's a pretty big deal, right? And that kind of shows the commitment of the organization to investing in transformational deals like Regenx or gene therapy or one-time gene therapy in the retina space, right? So I think that kind of demonstrates the commitment in terms of investing in opportunities, and you see that with AbbVie. I think in terms of the future and where we are, certainly, I had a fortunate position of launching Durista last year, albeit in a pandemic, launching a first-in-class biodegradable implants, sustained drug delivery, never been done in this space, right? And we did it successfully, and we've kind of have now set this new pillar within glaucoma of drug delivery, that there'll be others like Glykos and other companies that will also be coming in the space over time. But that's a new pillar that's important that we're going to continue to invest in. And as you know, we also have a product in presbyopia, the first drop in presbyopia, that we hope to have launched or get approval sometime at the end of this year. So the innovation stream continues and the investment stream continues with the organization. In fact, I think with AbbVie on board as well, I've seen even an accelerated level of commitment and investment into this business, right? Most times when you come in an organization, there's usually people shrink, right? Not here. We actually are very present and very active, as you know, in all the spaces we play in: dry eye, glaucoma, surgical, retina, or whatever it may be. Our presence is actually stronger than ever before. And that has to do with a couple of things. One is commitment of Rick Gonzalez and Elaine Stork, who are the leaders within the AbbVie organization. Jag Desange, you know very well, has been a great champion of this business, and he continues to champion our cause within AbbVie. And then certainly on the innovation front, the R&D team still remains the same under the leadership of Mike Robinson, who has our ophthalmology R&D business unit. We continue to invest in all these innovations, and our goal is as the same as yours, which is the patient being that North Star, is to continue to deliver innovation for not only practitioners but also for the patients who need vision-saving therapies.
Yeah, I think it's exciting to see that the recent acquisition of Retina. I think it shows clearly the long-term commitment, and it was a big acquisition.
It was a big one, yeah.
It wasn't a small one. For those of you who don't know, it was a pretty big one. You could see there was a press release on it, and obviously it's subject to federal regulatory approvals. But I think it's exciting. And the other thing is, I love the new name for presbyopic drop. I thought that was a cool name that you guys named it. I don't
know if it's public, is it?
Well, it is. I saw a not a billboard, but one of those things in the booths. A picture of it in one of the, I think.
Well, you did more than I do now. I'm in business.
I didn't say it, so but I saw it. But I thought, I got to tell you, that space is really intriguing, because I think that's going to be, a space where Allergan can really make an impact. I love the model. I love the cash model. I love the fact that it's just a huge unmet need and just massive market, albeit there's other people trying to get in, but I think you're going to be the first. And I think everyone's watching, probably analysts, ophthalmologists, investors are watching how this plays out. And I think if Allergan, I'm sure it does a great job, it'll just mean great things for everybody. And I think it's going to be fun.
My colleague, Glenn Kern, who runs that business, I mean, he's done a phenomenal job, right? This business is always by creating new frontiers, right?
Yeah.
So, Restasis was a good example of creating a dry eye frontier, right? I think the launch of this is going to create the new frontier in presbyopia or presbyopia, right? Durista, the new frontier in drug delivery, right? So I think, this is something that we're really good at. I think it's something we've done before, but something also that we invest in, right? And really think this through. So I think it's, I'm sharing this comment the other day with someone, eye care is going through such a big renaissance, right? And big innovation. You had the MIGS over the years. That was big innovation in surgical devices. But you have other areas like in retina, for example, that's being innovative with gene therapy and drug delivery, glaucoma, and we just talked about presbyopia. But this innovation is really exciting. I think it's a great time to be in eye care.
For sure. And obviously there's a lot of challenges,
Sure.
But I think it's just fun. I mean, it's exciting. It's just, and the time flies. I mean, I can't believe you've been here 16 years. I remember we met at, was it Fleming's when we met?
Fleming's Steakhouse.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can't believe I remember that, but I don't remember what I did yesterday, but
I remember that really well. Because you were the very first glaucoma specialist I ever met in the country.
Yeah, no, it's fun, and we've developed a really good friendship, and it's just an honor. I could talk to you for a lot much longer. The last part of this is really just kind of you and I both have had great mentors, right? We've had great teams and helping us. Really, if we're truly a reflection of who our teams are, who our mentors are, but. Tell us about when you're mentoring people, what are some of the things that they can learn from you navigating a career in pharma and in corporate America, if you will, in eye care as a entrepreneur?
No, for sure. Like I tell you, for me, mentoring has been really exciting because it's also an opportunity for me to learn, right? Because I think there's so much to be said back and forth with someone you're giving career advice or professional advice, right? I think what I always keep reminding anybody I work with in that regard is a couple of things. One is change is good, be open to change. Two is always connect the dots, right? So you may have a plan, but plans do change, right? We always talk about you could have the best strategy till you go to the market, and then you really realize your strategy you had is not the right strategy, right? and that's really important. People have to realize that you have to adopt and adapt. Right. And that's really critical in navigating anyone's career. And the third thing about people, I think humility is really important to have. No matter where you are, being really humble about your presence. But more importantly, it's making it about the people you surround yourself with. Right. So surround yourself with the best people, but not the same people. Right. And that's really critical, I think, in any venture, particularly in eye care, because in eye care, you're working with a lot of dynamic, different specialties, fast moving, complex regulatory, complex reimbursement environment, a lot of complexity, right? But it's all one of the best industries, one of the best specialties in which industry works really well with the specialty, right? There's a really good bond of relationship and context, right? So I think that's something I want to always emphasize is really enjoy that connection, but build on the connection. Have a purpose.
Those are all great points for those of you listening. I mean, there is obviously a lot of pearls there from many years of, mentorship, but also reading. If you read all the great books that Ramin's just nailing all of them. Have a great team, but be humble. No one wants to work with a jackass they don't like. I think at the end of the day, people do business with people they like. Right. And so, and I think I read somewhere, it was really interesting. I just read this book. It's basically a sort of, the concept of this whole Japanese concept of just sort of having an empty cup, to learn. So if you have a full cup, you're not going to ever learn because, and the analogy is ego, right? Like we're just full and you know everything. And to your point, if you're empty and you're humble and you're hungry, you're always going to learn. And it's very fascinating. It's hard to do, but in a large organization, I'm sure. But I'm sure that given your relationships, you've done such a tremendous job of cultivating that culture. I see in your team, and you just have a really great work ethic, and you work really hard. Don't complain, and I think those are all great traits. I'd love to have you back. This is, I know you got to jump, but we'd love to have you back again, and maybe in a year, and see how things are going, because a lot of good stuff you guys come down the pike, and it's always a pleasure seeing you.
The same here. And thank you for having me. And as I said before, you've been such a dear friend and a good mentor for me as well. So, it's been 16 years, and I'm looking forward for the next 16.
Yes, for sure. Same. Yeah, I wish you and Margaret, the girls, wonderful success and happiness, brother. And I'll see you again, I'm sure, if not in Academy sooner.
For sure. Thank you.
Sure, for sure.
Thank you for listening, everyone. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the OIS podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our iTunes channel so you get the latest ophthalmology insights. Got a story of your own to tell? Apply to be a guest at OIS.net.